All right, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Spartans! What is your profession?
A succulent Chinese meal.
Fantastic! Perfect!
Go off, King.
I'm walking here!
Hello, Ramblers. What did you think of that introduction? I edited it together using some clips from some of my favourite movie quotes and everything like that. But I wonder if it might be a little bit much. So yeah, if you really don't like that introduction, let me know. Send me a message on the Facebook page or the Instagram page at Taylor Ruddle Comedy, and I'd be curious to know what everybody thinks. So hello, happy Friday to you. I'm going to assume you're listening to this on Friday morning based on my own podcast listening habits. I used to tune into podcasts on the way to work and basically to get me through the work day. So hope you've had a good week, and I hope you have something fun in store for the weekend, and if not, just a bit of rotting on the couch or whatever the kids, like bed rotting I think is what the kids call it these days. I haven't done one of these in a little while, and I want to get back into doing more of them because I've been doing a lot of interviews on the podcast lately, and I just miss yapping into the mic on my own, as egotistical and selfish as that is. And I watched a TV show kind of recently that has me feeling inspired enough to create this episode. And also mainly because I don't know anybody else that's actually watched this TV show, so here we are. I'm going to talk about it to you, the listeners of the podcast. I'm going to talk a little bit about it without going into spoiler territory too much in the beginning, and then I'm going to give you a warning, and then I'll go into the spoiler territory. I just have many thoughts about this show, and I wanted to get them out somewhere, so here we are. So the TV show is called The Lazarus Project. It's a TV show created by Joe Barton. He is a British screenwriter. He's created a bunch of different sort of TV shows that I have not seen. However, if you have seen the movie called The Ritual, which is a horror movie, folk horror movie, I think it would be called, about three friends who go into the European wilderness and end up getting sort of tangled up with this kind of god creature. I don't know exactly. Sorry, maybe it's a little bit of a spoiler, but that actually is one of my favorite movies. So the fact that I liked The Lazarus Project so much does not surprise me now that I know. I just read that he wrote The Ritual. He's also apparently working on an untitled Cloverfield sequel. Cloverfield is an interesting franchise. It feels a little bit like the LinkedIn of kaiju films to me. I don't remember if the first Cloverfield film, I don't actually remember if it was that well received. Maybe it was. Okay, yeah, I just did a little bit of a search, and it seems like Cloverfield was quite well released. But the weird thing to me about it is that it just keeps spawning other properties around it. Like there's 10 Cloverfield Lane, which I thought I would enjoy, started watching and just couldn't get into it. There's something called the Cloverfield Paradox, which feels like it might be some kind of time travel movie, so maybe I have to check that out. And now there's apparently a untitled fourth Cloverfield film. It's being written by the guy who wrote The Lazarus Project, so again, I might have to check that out. So we're going to begin the non-spoiler part of the talk, and then I'll give you a warning when we switch over to spoiler territory. So the basic premise of The Lazarus Project, the main character is called George. He is an app developer who's living in probably London with his teacher girlfriend Sarah. He goes through his life pretty normally. In the first episode, it shows them going through about 6 months together. And then, out of nowhere, George just wakes up in his bed, and it is the 1st of July. As you can imagine, this is pretty disorienting for George. He ends up going through a few more time loops like this until eventually he is sort of recruited by actually, I don't think they're a government agency. I've been telling people they're a government agency, but I don't think they are. They're called the Lazarus Project. And they are secret kind of, the generic sort of secret spy organization that you see in heaps of other forms of media. And their job is to stop mass extinction level events from occurring. The show, I've just learnt before, was originally going to be titled Extinction, which I feel like the Lazarus Project was a bit of a better title for that, because Extinction makes it feel like it's an apocalyptic kind of show, which is very much not. So George gets recruited by the Lazarus Project, and it's the one thing that's interesting about the show is all of the characters, they don't feel like super spies. They just feel kind of like normal people who, like, there are some scenes where they talk about, they're in the pub having a drink and they're talking about work, as casual as you'd like, as if they were city workers just coming in from a day at the office to have a few drinks after work. Like, that's sort of how blasé and casual they are towards some of these really horrifying things that they've seen and done. And I think that's one thing that this show does really well, is it actually helped me understand something that I heard years ago about creating, I think it was script writing or novels or whatever it was. It was a guide for how to write engaging stories. And it was something to the effect of character drives the plot, not the plot. Or maybe it was character drives the story, not the plot. I think that was it was more accurate. This is many years ago, and I can't remember who said it or where I heard it. But this show actually helped me understand what that means, because all of the characters in the Lazarus Project are really cool. Like, it's pretty rare that I like every single of the main cast in a TV show, but all of the characters in Lazarus are really well done. Oh, and so I think it's a tiny spoiler, but it's not really. It gets revealed very quickly. So the reason George was remembering the past 6 months, but everybody else had forgotten it. So obviously his partner's very confused when he starts noticing that he's lived this day before and everything like that. And the Lazarus Project have a serum that they inject into people which lets them remember, somehow it lets them remember the time jumps. But there's a very small population of people who they sort of have like a DNA mutation that lets them do it automatically or do it on their own. And so George, he's one of these people. There's one other person in the Lazarus Project, Shiv, who is probably my favorite character. He's got it as well. And so, like I was saying, all of the characters are really good. They all feel like real people. And one thing Lazarus does really well is it shows us the kind of mental strain that you would have to go through if you were doing all of these things. And, if you think about it, every time they reset time, it's due to some kind of mass extinction, world-ending event. So it's things like pandemics, it's countries launching nukes at each other, I think natural disasters, that sort of thing. Anything that's like a mass, basically the end of the world. So all of these characters that have been living through the time being reset, because whenever they can't intervene, they do that any manner of ways. Like I said, all the characters are sort of agents of Lazarus. So if there's two dictators beefing, they'll send some agents in who will try to talk them down. If that doesn't work, they'll start to kill members of their cabinet and their team to try and weaken, they do what they can to try and de-escalate. But if it all doesn't work and they end up firing the nukes anyways, they have to reset time. And so these characters have seen the world end and lived through the world ending and even died. If you die and then jump back, you come back to life, but you have the memory of your own death. So as you can imagine, these characters all have, at times, they have shaky at best mental health. You never actually get to see the time machine. I guess this may be a spoiler. I should also say, I probably should have said this at the start, sorry, but this show got cancelled after 2 seasons. And that's been the reason that some people that I know haven't decided to watch it, because they don't want to get invested in it only for it to get cancelled. So that's why you might like to hear me talk about the spoilers, because I'll just tell you what happens in the show. Not right now, but soonish. Where was I going with this? I'm rambling a bit here. The show, they never show you the actual time machine. They explain it they're creating some sort of black hole, which is sending the Earth back in time. That's not a spoiler. You find it out within the first kind of 10 minutes of the show. And so many characters think that they can just end things by smashing up the time machine. I think my brother put it best. He said people think they can just take a hammer to the time machine and it'll all be over, which made me laugh quite a bit. I also should have spoken a little bit about the etymology of the show, The Lazarus Project. I don't really know a lot about the Bible, but I understand that Lazarus was a figure in the Bible. And I believe the reason he's sort of notable is because Jesus brought him back from the dead. I think Batman have got something in their lore about Lazarus pits, which I think is that if you throw someone into it, it will revive them from death. Yeah, Lazarus pits in Batman are like pools of green goo, and I suppose if you throw somebody into it, they get revived. I remember someone was explaining to me a storyline that one of the Batman comics did, where the Joker was repeatedly killing Batman and then throwing him into the pit and then like waking him up again and then just to kill him all over again. I sense maybe it's like the Lazarus Project. Maybe you remember your memories, so it was kind of inflicting mental trauma into the Batman. I'm not too sure. I could never find it. It sounded cool though. So I've just got the Wikipedia page up now. The biblical narrative of the raising of Lazarus is found in chapter 11 of the Gospel of John. It goes on to say that Lazarus was a follower of Jesus. Jesus was quoted to have said, "Our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I'm going to awaken him." When the apostles misunderstand, he clarifies, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe." It says that Lazarus had been dead for 4 days and was in his tomb at the time. It's funny because my impression of Jesus healing someone would be like, you know, the classic image of like lay on hands where he crouches next to him and puts his hand on his shoulder or something, and then a white light comes down from heaven and Lazarus gets back up or whatever. But it says he just like, because he was in a tomb, they had to like open the tomb up, and then Jesus just said, "Lazarus, come forth," and then Lazarus comes walking out, still wrapped in his grave cloths, which I think there's some pictures here where he looks like he's almost mummified. So a lot less spectacular than what I was picturing in my head with the healing of Lazarus. So the Lazarus Project, like I said, they have this ability to turn back time, and along with the idea of like the plot is really driven by these characters. Like it's all kind of it's one of the, like I said before, it helped me understand what people mean when they say characters drive the plot, not the plot. I apologize. I know I'm saying the quote wrong, but you get what I'm saying. Because when I was into season 2 of it, I realized that I was really interested in what each of the characters were going to do. Because obviously, as you can imagine, the time gets reset a lot, and they have a chance to do things over and stuff, and that does get really confusing. But yeah, I noticed that I was down to see what all the characters were up to. With something like Game of Thrones, for example, I was less into certain characters. Like it's very possibly controversial, but I never found Daenerys' story that compelling. I think there were bits of it that were cool, but I was way more interested in like the houses of Westeros bickering with each other. But you know, I guess that's the great thing about a big series like that with a lot of characters, is there's a little bit of something for everyone. So I think that's about as far as I can go without spoilers. If that show sounds like it would be something you're into, I recommend you stop this podcast, leave a review and a 5-star leave a 5-star review and on your favorite pod platform before you do so. But yeah, go and check that out. I think it was airing on Sky, not too sure, but you know, I'm not advocating it, but there are ways you can watch it online. I'll make of that what you will. I'm sure it'll be on Netflix or BBC Plus or something like that. The tone of the show, what I like is it feels like the atmosphere of the show feels like a BBC show. Like if you've ever watched what was that one? Black Mirror. The first episode where they're in Downing Street, and it's kind of cool. Like the color grading of the show feels very cool blue, and like I've been to London once, but I've not been there for any significantly long amount of time. But there's something about the way the BBC shoot London, like Doctor Who they make London really cool and kind of moody and misty and interesting. And this show very much has that same kind of vibe about it, which I really liked. It feels like an overcast weather day kind of show, if that makes sense. A rainy day show for sure. But yeah, like I said, if you are someone who wants a show to have like a complete ending and you don't want to invest in something that doesn't have an ending because the show got cancelled, I understand why it got cancelled. I'll explain why once we get into the spoilers. It's a shame, but I absolutely understand why. So yeah, we're going to begin the spoilers section of the podcast now. So one of the main things that disappointed me about this show is that I feel like this is something I learned from improv, where this is something I was doing wrong in improv. It was apparently I was making a promise to the audience and then I was not following through on the promise. I would argue that I was simply unaware of what the promise was, and I was not good at picking up on what the promise to the audience was. Sorry, by promise I mean, like, let's say that idea of Chekhov's gun. If you show a gun hanging on the wall in a movie, you're going to assume that the gun is going to be used at some point. And, I was showing the gun and then I was picking up a shovel and doing something with the shovel because I thought that the shovel was the promise, but it was actually the gun. And I feel like Lazarus Project does that a little bit because season 1, George joins the agency, and I was really excited about almost a kind of Doctor Who show about seeing them stop a few of these pandemics and or seeing, not specifically just pandemic, but seeing them stop these extinction level events. And I thought it was going to be an exciting sort of adventures in time. We were going to see all these different flavors of the way the world could end, like a new pandemic, there's all sorts of dictators with their fingers on the button with nuclear weapons and all that sort of thing. But really quickly, the show veers off that territory because in episode 2, I think, George's girlfriend is hit by a garbage truck, and one of the core tenets of the Lazarus Project is that they don't just reverse time just because they don't like what happened. They can only use it if it's a world level event. They call it a code black. And so obviously George is not happy with this. So George sort of turns into a rogue agent. And this is a little bit of a tough jump in logic because it does show George training with them and George learning all their skills and all that. He was obviously a very smart guy beforehand because he was an app developer. But yeah, George becomes this sort of rogue agent and he starts doing things to sort of, he's trying to start another nuclear war so that they'll have no choice but to turn back the clock. And one thing I quite liked about George as a character is he does some horrible things, but sometimes when I watch shows where characters are causing mayhem and carnage and, they're going to shoot someone, but they hesitate or their hands shaking too much or whatever, George really does not F about. I remember the first time he killed someone, quote unquote innocent. I think it was a police officer or an enemy agent or something, but he just smoked the guy. There was no hesitation at all. And it was weirdly refreshing to have a character who's so committed to what he's doing that he will literally do. It's so hard to explain, but he just doesn't waste. He doesn't feel like he's wasting time. He's not beating around the bush, as they say. But that was what it kind of sucked. I wanted to see him be a part of the team. I feel like to me, and this might be me not picking up on what the actual promise of the show is, but to me the promise felt like we were going to get the first season was George becoming a member of the team, joining them on some missions, stopping the end of the world a few times, and then you can get into the weird double agent, double cross stuff. Felt like we kind of missed a season at the start. And like I was saying before, the character Shiv, he is he's the other person who has the ability from birth. So his childhood was fascinating because when you're a child, I guess being able to walk and talk and stuff is a mental thing. So he had been living as a toddler for 6 months, and then there was a reset. And then, as far as his mum knew, he got up one day and was just able to walk and talk in full sentences, and it all just seemed like it came out of nowhere. But it was just because, he'd been living as a child for 6 months learning all this stuff, which he retained the information when they jump back. So, that's why he could do it. So he's the one that's very melancholy on their team because he's lived through the end of the world so many times, and he's been getting reset ever since he was a baby. So he's probably like, if you think about how long he's been alive or how long he's been conscious for, he's probably way older than the rest of them in terms of like how long he's been cognizant for. And I really related to this character of Shiv because he, like, his whole life is the Lazarus Project. And there's an episode later on that deals with him missing the death of his mother because he was on a job. And then, the great thing about a time travel show is they can use that to show characters going back in time and making the correct decision. Well, correct is relative, but it was the decision that he felt better about, was going and visiting his mother before she passed away. The show does also delve into like relationships between the characters. Like, as you can imagine, it's probably really hard to have a relationship with someone who every time you have to reset, they go back 6 months ago. And so they don't remember all these experiences that you had together. And like, that's a big thing that happens when they initially get injected with the serum. All their memories of all the resets come flooding at them at once. And there's so like this big spoilers, but in season 2, so season 1, George does all this stuff. He kills so many people. He shoots Shiv and kills him. He does espionage and he double crosses the Lazarus Project, and he shoots like the Russian ambassador and her family and sets off a nuclear bomb. He does all this horrific stuff. They eventually do Code Black and reset, but then as it turns out, his girlfriend was already thinking of breaking up with him just before that happened. And then, because as you can imagine, he's just so stoked to have her back that he's happy to be like the safe kind of, safe, boring boyfriend who they just go to work and they go to pubs and all this kind of thing. But she's evidently wanting like something more from life. She wants to be a bit more adventurous. And, the irony is that he's living a very adventurous life, but she doesn't see any of it. And the show explores the idea of destiny quite a lot, which the relationship between George and Sarah is interesting because, like, as far as George sees it, he did all this stuff to bring her back, which is massive. And then what else is interesting is there was a year in the Lazarus project where these other 2 agents were trying to stop a war in the kind of like Russia, that bit of Europe that sort of turns into the Middle East, and nukes just kept going off, and they had to reset something like 17 times. And so what was cool, like what I liked about Lazarus Project is when they reset, everything doesn't happen exactly as it did. It's almost like, to explain it, let's imagine you rolled like a dice, and if it lands on 1, you do this, you make a cup of tea. If it lands on 2, you make a cup of coffee. And like each face of the dice has a different action associated with it. And so then every time they reset, it's like the dice gets rolled for everything, and it always plays out differently each sort of iteration of the timeline. And so George, him and Sarah met at a party together, but you later on get to see all the times that they either didn't hit it off properly and they didn't sort of end up together, or they never ended up meeting, or everything like that. And what was really interesting is that, like, so obviously for George, he feels like Sarah's his true love, his own, his one and only sort of thing. But she was showing that, like, actually, and when she got the serum later on, she becomes a Lazarus agent. She is like, let's say they re-rolled 17 times. And only like 2 of them she ended up with George, but in the rest of them, or like the bulk of the other ones, she ended up with this random like street musician guy. I can't remember what his name was. George mocks the name later on. I don't know. It was a slightly odd name. And so it really plays around with the idea of destiny. Like George is adamant that he always finds her in all the different timelines, but Sarah's obviously questioning whether George is like her person, and that's like, to be honest, that's a not a moral thing, like a philosophical thing that I sometimes wonder about is people always wonder, like, the idea of, like, do you have just one person out there for you, or is it like, is it as random as the universe is, and, are you just trying to find as suitable of a match as you can, and then just sort of be happy together for as long as it's kind of working? So I think that's a big thing that a lot of people wonder about. So the show does deal with that quite a bit, which is cool. They've got the cool thing, like I love time travel shows because there's so many sort of storytelling elements you can play with. Like, if you ever watched Dragon Ball Z when you were younger, or even now, the show Heroes, they do this as well. There's the idea that somebody from the past grows up to be like a badass kind of future version. And so, like, there's a little kid in Lazarus Project who she's about 11 or something. She gets sent back in time. And then, so because she was sent back in time, she just grows up and she reunites with the main cast in season 2, and she's like 20 or something. So she's just like an adult. She's just like a cool adult who's kind of survived on her own. And the two versions of them meet each other. So she's got like basically like a cool older sister, but it's just herself from the future. So that's a time travel trope that I love. I think just in general, I find the idea of what ifs and alternate futures so fascinating, because I have several moments in my own life, and I'm sure we all have them, where I think to myself, if I had made a different choice when this happened, it would have such a knock-on effect onto so many different aspects of my life. Let's see if I can think of a few of them now. So when I was studying graphic design, I was one of the few people that decided not to do the second year of study. I did my first year. It's kind of like a 2-year course. You didn't have to do both years, though. It was kind of like beginner and advanced. And I found that initial beginner class really easy. I should say this was probably a mistake, because it then took me like 10 years to actually get a job as a designer. So that might have been a fumble. But I did this first year, and then at the time I was working at a pizza restaurant. It's just like I think I was a driver then. I might have been a manager. I'm not quite sure. I don't remember. But I finished that year, and then one of my tutors came to me and asked if I was interested in applying for a design job somewhere. And like at the time, I was kind of happy. Just chilling a bit, because this is a theme that I've been exploring lately with my being a full-time entertainer. It feels like I'm kind of getting to live. It feels like I'm getting to do what I want to do for once. I've always deeply resented the fact that, like, literally from the first day of going to school, I remember you go from play school where you're kind of left to your own devices and you can kind of just, do what you want, to suddenly like, oh, you've got to be here, 5 days of the week? That's more than, I don't know what the calculation is as to how much percentage of your week that is, but yeah, I really was not happy being told that, like, no, we did the first day of school. I was not happy, didn't enjoy it, fucking cried for most of the day, just did not want to be there. And then I thought, well, fuck, at least that's done. And then I was like, no, you're going back tomorrow. And I just remember being livid. I was not happy at all. Where did I go with this? Oh yeah, so at the time, because I was just working and it was like relatively chill. I was working and studying. I was in a relatively happy relationship at the time, had good friends around me. Like, I felt like I wasn't ready to just jump into like a full-time job. I wanted to kind of enjoy, I'd literally just finished school the year before. I think I was like 19 or 20. I might have been more like 21 when we finished study. I'm not quite sure. It was around that age. And yeah, I just didn't want to be like I didn't want to go straight into like an office job. So I said no thanks. And then it was kind of lucky if a friend of mine actually ended up taking up the job. And I think he had some good memories while working there, but he really wanted to get out by the time he left. So it's one of those ones where I don't know if things would have shaken up differently if I had gone to that interview. Obviously there's also like, would I have even gotten the job if I'd gone to the interview? that's another kind of branching point. But yeah, that's one thing I wonder about. Because then it took me many years to find a design job. I had to move to Japan, get that through kind of nepotism of having family over there for some help. And then, yeah, got back to New Zealand in 2019. And yeah, then again, through knowing someone at the job, started working at a newspaper as a designer. That was probably like 10 years after studying. So that's a real branching point. And I'm so curious to see what would have happened if I had have said yes to going to that interview. Would it have changed anything, or would I still be here right now talking to you about time travel? So I guess, things have shaken out all right. It's what time am I recording this? So for you, it'll be Friday morning. For me, it is 3:30 p.m. Just about to wrap this podcast up, and then I'm going to go host a quiz night. So, to be honest, things haven't worked out too badly for me now, have they? I think I'm going to wrap up the episode there. I've enjoyed talking a little bit about Lazarus Project. I guess I'll just quickly say why I think I'm not surprised it got cancelled, because the second season, they end up inventing genuine time travel, and so it gets really hard to follow because there are two versions of most of the characters. There's a 2012 version and a 2024 version, and they meet each other and they can both remember the loops. And then so what happens is, like, the characters that have been sent back through time, they still get affected by the Lazarus Project resetting things, which means they retain all the information that they've had up until that point. So you have a lot of the characters meeting each other for the first time many times, and things getting reset and messed with. And I was really struggling to follow which version of which character I was looking at by the end of the show. And because it was so dark, and it was talking about the end of the world, and people, the main characters, they get killed so many times. They just get shot in the head, fucking boom, done. Like, it's ruthless. It's not gory, but there's a lot of death. Alrighty, so I think I'm going to end it there. Highly recommend you check it out. All the cast from a diverse range of backgrounds. There's very good gender equality. The ladies are just as tough as the fellas in this show, and yeah, no, it's all worth watching, even if you can't get past the horrible cliffhanger ending. I was annoyed at the cliffhanger. I won't spoil that for you, but there is a real because people asked me, they were like, does it at least kind of wrap up? And it's like, no, it raises a lot of questions, and then it just ends. Just like this podcast. I love an Irish goodbye. So on that note, goodbye.